Now that I have the accurate colors mixed up onto my palette, I have 3 different brushes that are pretty loaded with those 3 different values, 3 different colors. Now it's time to apply it to my painting. Now obviously, if you can see the difference between the photo reference and the painting, you'll see some inaccuracies going on with some of the blends and some of the surface quality. There are some nice surface qualities down in this area, but then as we get closer to the edge of the painting, you can see some splotchy, inaccurate surfaces, colors, and blends. So now we're going to address that. So I'm going to scoot these over just a little bit. Yeah, stop. I'm going to scoot these brushes over just a little bit so you can see. So those are my painting brushes, and then I'm going to bring in some of my blending brushes. All right, so these 3 right here are not as high quality of brushes. Now you can use any dry, soft bristle brush as a blending brush. So these painting brushes right here that I would normally use for painting, if I spread those out just a little bit, they're nice and clean and dry. Those can be little blending brushes as well, as long as they're clean, as long as they're dry. Then these larger brushes obviously can be used as blending brushes and so on. So as long as your brushes are clean and dry, they can be used as blending brushes. All right, so I'm going to push those aside just a little bit, get them out of the way, and then I'm going to bring my painting brushes that are loaded with paint back onto the scene, and now I'm going to start painting. All right, so I'm going to start with this lighter value, and I'm going to add paint to the surface of my painting, and I can be pretty rough with this or unrefined. The one principle that I wanted to bring up at this point is I started in this area right here because it is a large shape. And it will be easier to get those gradations and blends on a large shape than it is to get on a little teeny shape at this point. So I'm going to start with large shapes to small shapes. So this big part of the painting is, if I break this painting down into percentage, this area right here is maybe a quarter of my painting. And if I can get that section done and blended with the colors that I have, and there's not very much detail, all it is a gradation, that's a good step, and it will get me mileage, or I'll understand with these large shapes of blends, I'll be able to understand that better. So when I get into these smaller areas and more detailed areas, that mileage of doing those large shapes and those simplified shapes will help me when I get into the details. Okay, so I will now start to blend or paint these colors onto my painting. Now when I use the term rough or unrefined, I'm adding the color and I'm not really worried about some of the detail work or some of the blends right now. Now, when you do this right and you start to blend, and what's going on top of my paint right now, what's going on top of my bottom layer of paint, it starts to blend visually, and it's starting to feel right to me. Like down in this area right in here, when I look up at the photo reference right in there, that blend right there is starting to feel really good to me. It's feeling accurate. The color, the temperature, and the value is starting to look very accurate to me. Now, up in this area, when I look up into here, there's going to be a little bit more of a darker, more brown gradation, but I'm going to start to work in sections now and I'm adding that paint, and when it goes down onto that lay-in, it's feeling really good right down in this area where I'm working right now. Now, I'm starting to use a little bit lighter hand, or I'm not putting as much pressure on the paint bristles, and so it's starting, I'll use the word feather or gradate a little bit better. All right? If I was to push down really hard, it would put a lot more paint down, and it would get a little bit more painterly and a little bit more thick, opaque paint showing paint indications of bristles. And there is no texture, there is no paintbrush bristle work on this area, and so I don't want that. I want to blend that just a little bit better. Okay, so now I'm getting over into this area where I need to change it and make the gradation. So I'll put this light valued brush down. I'll pick up that medium color that I mixed up earlier, and now what I'll start to do is I'll start to paint on that. And as I get closer to that new paint that I just put down, the lighter valued paint, and I start to blend those two together, you can, right before your very eyes, you can start to see that gradation. Now, my pressure right now is very light. The pressure that I'm putting down on the paint brush, where it meets the surface of the painting, I'm just barely, I'm going to use the word tickle. I'm tickling the surface of the painting. All right? Now, if I got too far over, then I can put this paintbrush down, and I can pick this other one up, and I can start to blend that out as well. So if it starts to look inaccurate, then I can grab that other paintbrush that has that lighter value, warmer color on it, and I can start to apply that. And I'm going to start to kind of use crisscrossing or cross-hatching brush strokes. And what that will do is it will start to mix that paint even better, and it'll look more accurate. Can you start to see that? Now I'm going to put that down. I'm going to pick up that medium value again, and I'm going to refresh the color that's on my paintbrush. I'm going to load what I'll use the term, I'll load it back up with color. And I'm going to come up and I see this inaccurate blend or gradation compared to my photo reference. And again, I have my photo reference right next to the painting, so I can really gauge and judge accurately right next to each other. All right? So you can definitely see a line right here. And so I'm going to come back in and I'm going to start to add that more accurate color. And it's a wet. So what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to work in sections and I'm going to work in layers. So I'm going to put that layer down again, or that paintbrush, and I'm going to pick up the lighter value and I'm going to refresh or reload with color. And what I'll start to do, now you can definitely see that there's a line there, but I have wet paint here and wet paint here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that lighter wet paint color and I'm going to start to blend them together. Now there's a piece of dust on my painting and I'm going to remove that. I'm going to unload it with, I just took that piece of dust or whatever material that was, and it's on my bristles, and I'm going to make sure that it doesn't stay on the painting, and I'm going to put it onto the paper towel. Now, if you can start to see what's happening, I just got that lighter valued paint, and I'm going to start to crosshatch my brush strokes so it blends that wet paint into wet paint, and you're going to get a nice soft blend. I'm going to be very careful when I come up to that edge of that apple, because I don't want to carry that light value over into there, because that's going to mess my lay-in in. it's going to mess my layout in that transparent color that I originally put down to cover the white gesso. It's going to make it more inaccurate. So I'm going to be very accurate when I'm applying this paint. Now, if you can start to see, that inaccurate gradation is now gone. So if I remove that, if I remove my paintbrush and let you look at it, and when I bounce my eye back and forth, I'm now starting to dial this area in just a few minutes. So the more time I spent mixing color and using the acetate and getting the correct colors, the more time I spent doing that. And now when I'm applying it to my painting, it's going faster and more accurate, and you're going to build confidence that way. All right, so I'm going to keep moving up just a little bit. Now I can tell that that's too light compared to up here, but that's okay because I'm going to put some wet paint into there. And then I'm going to put my light valued paintbrush down, and I'm going to pick up that medium value, and I'm going to mix those two values together on my palette. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to start to lightly touch those two values together. And again, I'm going to use the word tickle. The pressure that I'm using right now is very light. And the more I finesse that, the more blended it's going to be. Now, the one thing that I do need to mention at this point is I haven't even touched my blending brush. I'm using what is called wet into wet. So I haven't even picked up my dry blending brush yet because I'm being more accurate with my wet into wet paint. So if you look at that right now, there is a little bit of discrepancy right here. But up in here, that paint is looking nice and blended. So I'll just keep working that out. And the principle will remain as it starts to go towards that darker value darker value and darker blend up in here, that's okay because I still have that darker color over there that I'm going to use that same principle and wet into wet, and I'm going to start blending those together. Okay, so I just changed my brush stroke from vertical strokes to horizontal strokes. And I'm going to start blending that up. And I'm going to start to really feather or tickle that surface right there. And I just switched my paintbrush strokes again from horizontal to vertical to side to diagonal so that it can start to blend those colors just a little bit more accurate. And I don't have any brush strokes. There's no brush strokes up there. All right, I'm going to remove that. I still see a kind of a discrepancy right there. So I'm going to set my medium values down, my medium value brush down just a little bit. And I'm going to pick up my light. Oh, I need to refresh that just a little bit. Now I know it's not as light over there, so I'm going to mix those two colors up there just a little bit. And I'm going to add some of those colors. And you can see some pretty serious paint strokes right there. But the more I blend those together, wet into wet, they'll go away and it'll be a little bit more accurate. Okay, so you can kind of see that, and then I'm going to reload with some of that lighter value. Because what's happening is this wet into wet, it will contaminate your brush with that different value, and so you have to keep reaching over and refreshing or clean up that color from your initial paint, because that value and that value are mixing and it's inaccurate. So I have to keep reaching over and refreshing that lighter value. Okay, so I'm getting into a nice blend. You can see that. It's still not as nice and blended as the photo reference, but I'm going to keep working on this and working on it until it feels really good. And that is the benefit of oil paint. Oil paint stays wet for a lot longer than some of the other mediums, such as acrylics. Acrylics dry really fast. And so this is the benefit of oil paint, is it's going to be wet for a lot longer, so you can work on these blends forever. Okay, well, not forever, but for a longer period of time. So there's some inaccuracies up here in this top part, and so I'm going to grab my color, my medium valued color, and I'm going to start to apply it up there and get it wet into wet. And I'm going to start building a relationship between that medium value. I'm going to refresh my color. Now, if I'm mixing on my color right there on my palette, on that pool of paint, and it starts to get a little sticky, that means the liquid is doing its job and it's starting to dry out just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reach over and I'm going to grab just like 2 or 3% of liquid, and what that will do is it will thin out that paint just a little bit and make it more blendable or more workable. And I'll start to add that. Now again, I'm using some pretty light brush strokes or light pressure. And as I build that up, and I'm going to get all of the paint strokes or brush strokes out of there. And it's still looking a little rough to me. Now I'm going to, you can see that there's a definite lighter value against this dry paint. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick up that darker value and I'm going to start to paint on that, and I'm going to start to blend. What you're doing here is you're really disciplining yourself and being accurate. Okay. And you're training yourself to be more skilled in matching color and value, matching surface. So this is a really smooth surface, and so you're disciplining yourself to learn how to do those types of things. So later on, when you're creating your artwork, if you have to communicate a smooth surface, you know how to do it. If you need to match a color and a temperature, you can do it. If you need to match a texture, you can do it. So I've got that area pretty much done. Now I'm noticing that value right there is a little bit darker, and so I'm going to reach over and I'm going to make a variation of that darker value that I just mixed up. And now I'm going to start to add that. Now I add that and it's a little bit too cool. So I just grabbed a little bit of burnt umber to that darker value to warm it up. And now I'm going to blend those two together. And now you can't even really tell the difference between the two blends. The gradation is becoming more and more accurate. Now, when I use the word, I'm going to set that value down just for a second because there's some splotchy paint right here. I'm going to reach in here and refresh my color. There's some splotchy or uneven surfaces with that transparent lay-in paint that I put very at the first of this painting. It looks like paint instead of photo reference and gradation. And now it's starting to go away because of my blending. All right, so you can kind of see what's starting to happen. Again, I haven't even touched my dry blending brushes. This, I'm just laying in wet into wet. So it still feels a little inaccurate with this gradation right here compared to up to my photo reference, right? You can see that, right? So I'm gonna start to carry that blend over just a little bit. Refresh my color. lighten up on my pressure that I'm putting down on the paintbrush. Refresh my color. Pick up my medium value. Start to blend that just a little bit more. Wet into wet, because both of these brushes have wet paint on them. That's why it's blending so well. Whoops, I just made a major mistake. So you can't see that. So you can see where I just took my medium value and I made a brush stroke and it's too abrupt for that darker value. So I'm going to grab my darker value brush, load it up, and I'm going to blend that out. Again, use your different cross-hatching brush strokes and it will really blend beautifully. And right before your very eyes, you're going to see that really beautiful gradation from a darker warm value drifting over to a medium, drifting over to a light, and that's what's starting to happen there. Okay, I pick this up. There's a little bit of inconsistency with these brush strokes down here for that gradation. Okay, so that part of the demo is over. So you can kind of see that I'm really dialing in this accuracy right here. But now the surface is still a little bit brush strokey or painterly, so I need to make sure it gradates and blends beautifully just like this. So enter the blending brush. So this is a dry, soft bristle brush that has no paint on it. It's completely dry, and what I'm going to start to do now is I'm going to take it and I'm going to start to lightly blend those brush strokes that I just made with the two wet brushes, the two wet into wet, and I'm going to start to blend those. Now, I know you won't be able to see this, but as I hold that brush up to the camera, you can see that there's just a little bit of tiny paint pigment on that brush right there on those bristles. But what that's going to start to do is it's going to really start to blend. Now I'm using, if I were to put a percentage on the pressure that I'm using on this paintbrush right now, if 100% is I'm like pressing down really hard and scrubbing, the percentage is I'm about at 2 or 3%. I am just barely touching the surface of those bristles to the painting, and I'm just really softly blending those paint strokes or that wet paint that I just put on. I'm just lightly blending that with that dry brush. Now I will probably make 20 or 30 brush strokes. If the paint is really thick and it's really applied heavily onto the surface, that's going to contaminate or put a lot of paint on those dry bristles, and so you have to clean it. And the way you clean it is you have a nice clean paper towel or a cloth or an old t-shirt, and you move away from the painting, and so I'm going to have to do this on screen. So I'm going to move my painting away from where I'm going to clean my brush, and I'll just take it and I'll just clean the bristles very lightly. Now, the reason why I'm not doing this over the painting is because that friction and that motion right there of cleaning my brush will remove some of the particles of that paper towel, and they'll float down and they will attach themselves to the wet paint. And sooner or later, if you don't put the painting away from that, you're going to have all sorts of particles onto your painting, and you're not going to like that, and it's going to distract you. So when you clean your blending brush, make sure you clean it away from your painting. All right? So I've cleaned it. It's now nice and dry again, and I'm going to continue to blend those paint strokes. Now, this might take you a little bit of time to understand how to do that. You might put too much pressure and all of a sudden remove too much paint off of this and it'll leave a streak. All right? So when this paintbrush gets a little bit too contaminated and I cleaned it and cleaned it and cleaned it and it doesn't blend anymore, then I'll set it aside and I'll pick up a new clean dry brush and I'll start to blend. And if you notice, I'm blending from, I'm applying the brush very lightly from the light value and I'm dragging it across to the dark value. And if that gets a little bit too streaky, then I'll clean my brush. I'm cleaning my brush off screen down below my painting. So now it's a clean bristle brush, dry brush, and I'm going to drag from light to dark. And that will really create a beautiful blend and gradation. So right before your very eyes, I'm working from light, a large shape, to a light shape, to a dark shape, and I've mixed up 3 different values, a light value, a medium value, and a dark value. Okay, and there you'll start to see that beautiful blend. Okay, now what I'll probably do is if there's still some inconsistency in blends, right in there, that's such a beautiful surface right now. This surface right there is such a beautiful surface. It's becoming to look more like the photo reference that I'm not going to touch that anymore. I'm going to I know that there's a little bit of liquid in that paint, and I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to move over to here, and I'm going to keep painting, and then I'll move down into this awesome blend from the cast shadow up into that lighter value. I'm going to mix the same type of paint. I'm going to use the same principles, the same techniques, and I'm going to use 2 or 3 brushes, and I'm going to mix this color, and this color is obviously already there, and I'm going to blend those together. And then I'm going to use the same principle, and I'll have that color mixed up, and then I'll move into the cast shadow. I'll mix some other colors over here, and I'll start to blend and get those gradations as beautiful as they are on the reference. Okay, so that's the mix 3 values with 3 different brushes, wet into wet, and then when I want that really beautiful gradation, I will pick up a dry blending brush and I will blend those brush strokes together so it'll represent that beautiful light gradation to dark gradation. And I'm going to move that. I'm going to move that photo reference up so you can start to see what's starting to happen down here. So I'm going to be really careful, and I'm going to mix these colors up, and I'm going to make that gradation even better. I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to blend that gradation just a little bit better, and I'll keep going until I get that section completely done and completely accurate, and then I'll move down into here, move down over to here, move up into there, and then I'll start on the apple.